Today we're covering every single Illusionist in Silver Age, so we're going to be covering Enigma, Prism, and then Dromai. For a couple different reasons, Enigma is going to be leaning more into ward and spectral shield generation. The first reason why is because her hero text makes a spectral shield attack cost 1 less each turn. She has the Chi ability where if you're able to transcend and then pitch a Chi, you can make a spectral shield with a +1 counter. The reason why this all synergizes is because of her weapon Cosmo. Auras that you control with wards become weapons, with their base attack equal to their ward value, and then they're able to pay 1 in attack. But more importantly, any auras that are attacking with +1 counters also get go again. So the way that this all kind of synergizes is that like a spectral shield is a ward 1 token, so at the very least, you can pay 0 because your first spectral shield costs 0 for the turn and attack for 1. If that spectral shield has a +1 counter, like via Enigma's ability, that attack will also have go again. This means that if you have like multiple spectral shields or ward cards in play that have counters on them, you can just pitch a blue and swing everything in a single turn. She scales her board state really well. If your opponent can't push over, then anything that's left on the table then becomes a weapon. So she kind of pressures your opponent on 2 different axes where your opponent has to deal enough damage to clear the ward, which also means that when you're swinging with the ward, they normally have to say no blocks. Normally they have to keep every single card and try to convert it for damage, because if they go too weak during their turn, you have a bunch of defensive tech and you can just stop their turn. The other really powerful thing too is we're talking about all this, like the win con is like if your board gets removed, you lose the game. But the board is all ward cards, so they protect your life total as well. So we have other cards in here like big tall phantasm attacks, just easy ways to clear the end game out. It's actually a very powerful deck when it all kind of operates. I think it'll have to spend some time in the meta to see if this can like actually compete with the aggro deck, so because this deck will fumble into aggro compared to slower strategies. We're going to be very defensive orientated, so that goes with all the equipment. We don't really need a resource. There are some cards we could technically pay a resource for, so maybe you could run the Blossom Spring, but I think for the most part, you're going to want just having as much blocking capability as possible in your armor. The cool thing about the Wave of Reality is it leaves behind a Spectral Shield, which means that at the very least, you can let this break if your opponent attacks you on turn 1, and then you can get a Spectral Shield and start the engine going. Some cards that are worth noting here are going to be cards like Astral Etchings, where if you have a Spectral Shield in play, you can combat trick this and add 3 counters to it, which is really good. If you're able to put counters on a single Spectral Shield and then just block out and protect it the entire game, you can swing with it. Like let's say if it has an Astral and you used Enigma's hero power as well in this Spectral Shield, you're just going to swing for 5. So it's like better than a Guardian Hammer and it costs 0. So you can just play an Astral Etchings in some matchups on a single Spectral Shield, block with every other card in your hand, and just send the Spectral Shield for the rest of the game until they lose. And then the rest of the ward cards are going to be cards like Waxing Spectre, where you're more often going to play this on your own turn, so you're going to play it and then swing with it. This will attack for 4 with the +1 counter, at which point you can just let it die with ward 3. I mean, this is all really good, right? If it swings for 4 and blocks for 3, this is like a 2-card 7. Same goes for Waning Vengeance, although if you can play this defensively and leave behind a Spectral Shield, you also kind of get that benefit. So this one's like definitely a lot more flexible. A Solitary Companion is a kind of interesting card that you will end up having to run in a lower power format like this, but it's pretty good. If your opponent manages to clear out your board, you can just play it and then pass, and it's basically like a 0 for 4. It has a ward 3 and then it leaves behind a Spectral. Another really good card like Astral Etchings is Spectral Manifestations, where you play it and then you can swing with it. It's like pretty similar to Astral Etchings, except it also makes the Spectral Shield in the same go. Everything else here is like an aggressive card or a defensive card. So in terms of like aggro cards, we have cards like Enigma Chimera, just like into non-popper decks. This will close the game out basically. So you just send 8 and they lose. Like it's almost half their health total. Same goes for Spear or Surreality. And non-popper decks is a 1 for 5 with go again. And then we have like defensive cards that enable you to protect your ward. Cards like On the Horizon, Springboard Somersault from Arsenal. And then we have all of our Chi cards. The Chi cards, including the second tenet of Chi, this is just an easy one to transcend into because you can just go ahead, play it, play your Chi, it'll get go again. You can then activate Enigma with your Chi card in hand and then send your Spectral for 2 with go again. But everything else here is just an easy way to transcend. Moon Chakra is really clean because you can play Moon Chakra, hold priority, and then play one of your Chi cards. So you can play this defensively and block for 3 in addition to transcending. And then our sideboard here is anti-aggro stuff and then anti-control stuff. So we have anti-aggro with Essence of Ancestry Body and cut down to size. Against some arcane-based matchups, you have Oasis and Null Rune. This can also come into Dominate style decks. Same goes for Unmovable. And then into like very slow controlling matchups, you could try Iris of Reality. I'm at least experimenting with this, but I want to say Cosmo is probably just correct like 9 times out of 10. I think it synergizes really well with the way that this deck is built. Playing into Solitary Confinement, and we end up going on the play here. Unfortunately, we can't really transcend super cleanly. We can play the Enigma Chimera though, and just give it a go again off the path well traveled. It's a little bit awkward because we end up not being able to put anything in Arsenal. We could put the path well traveled in Arsenal and just wait for something else, but I think this is probably the easiest time to use it. I end up just blocking for 3. I think I'm just going to give it a go again here, and then activate Enigma. And I don't think we're going to attack. I don't want my opponent to filter anything else. So we're just going to go ahead and have to IP the On the Horizon back to hand. And then looking at this, this is really awkward, but I think we're just going to be blocking for 7, hoping my opponent clears both of my Spectrals between the Wave of Reality and the Spectral Shield, and then just playing the Solitary Companion. They come in for 6. So we just take a block for 6 here. The goal is to put ourselves in a position where we can either go Spectral Shield for 2 and then just play the Solitary Confinement, or to lose all of our shields available and then just play the Solitary Confinement and get the extra Spectral and pass. So it looks like they're going to shred, and then I'm assuming they're going to push over with the digits. This is kind of awkward because it puts us in the weird third scenario where we can play the Solitary Companion, but we'll still have a Spectral in play. The other alternative is that if they don't flick here, okay, they do. So there's kind of no point. We could have played the Waning Vengeance, but that doesn't really do anything for us. Actually, we can have the Wave of Reality be the ward. So actually, I take it all back. We end up in the same position, so we're still good to go. We're going to get the 4 Valley out of the Solitary Companion. So the Spectrals will eat what's left over. We lose some cards. It's okay. We're just going to play our Solitary Companion, Arsenal, our Waning Vengeance, and pass. This hand is pretty good, at least in the sense that it can play Essence of Ancestry Body and do basically nothing else. But that's perfectly fine. We can slow down a little bit and just wait for a couple good push turns into Arachne. With an incoming Spider's Bite, we're going to say no blocks and just have the shield eat it. And I think we're just going to block for 3 on this. Our hand doesn't actually convert very well, so I'm kind of okay just sticking cards in front here. They're going to go over to 4. I think what we're going to do is we're just going to play the Moonshocker, hold onto our Solitary Companion, and then I think what we're going to do is we're just going to play the Waning Vengeance, and then Arsenal. We send our 3 here. Our board is looking pretty good, but it doesn't really have any way to give itself go again. We don't have any counters here, so that's the only awkward part, is that we don't have a way to send multiple ward attacks in a single turn yet. We get a block from my opponent. That's always good. Less cards they have, higher chance that we have to have our board stick. This hand is very good because it can play a Waxing Spectre, which means that if they don't go too tall on this turn, we have the ability to send 2 ward attacks in a single turn. The downside is our hand actually blocks for 0. So we may end up just kind of losing everything. So they pop everything to send this. Floating the resource is so telegraphed, so I know that they're sending an additional 3 on top of this. If that's the case, we're just going to have to probably play the Waxing Spectre in response. 2 sides though, I mean, that's manageable. We can take that one. I was more worried about being spiked with Blood Rot. This one's okay. We'll just have this eat all the damage, take 3 off of this. It's not a big deal. I was more worried about being left with a Blood Rot or something, because then it means that it's really hard for us to resolve our ward on our turn. But then our turn is just going to be playing the Waxing Spectre, and then we could just play the Waning Vengeance here as well. And then we can transcend. We can just hang on to the Ancestry for a little bit longer, I think. We get a block, and then we're just going to send the Waning Vengeance. We end up getting an entire card for that. That's pretty interesting. I don't quite know what their hand is. I feel like it probably would have been better to save it, though. This hand is completely unplayable. That's so crazy. We're going to go ahead and block with On the Horizon here. We see Grains on top of the deck. We can't do anything about that. Absolutely bizarre stuff. We're just going to go ahead and block with the Astral Etchings. And then our turn is going to be sending 4 and then playing out our Aura and then Arsenal Springboard. Put a blocks for 3 on this. That's very good. The less cards they have, the less likelihood that we have to lose our board. We'll go ahead and resolve the Aura and put our 0/4 D-React in Arsenal now. This hand has Waxing Spectre, so it's pretty incredible because if we keep enough cards, we can play and send 2 Waxing Spectres in the same turn. My opponent's going to open up with Double Trouble. I need to think about what they could probably do here. They would need 2 reacts, so it could be +3 and +3. 4, and then yeah, Razor Seals +3 and +3. We have the ward to stop it. I guess we might as well play the Somersault here. So here's the deal. It's our choice of which ward 3 we want to lose. I think we're going to actually, as weird as it sounds, we're going to lose the Ancestry. Just because our board is so big, I actually don't know if we're going to be able to actually trigger this effect, unless if we just like completely brick. And then having this just means that we just have more damage, because it means that we're going to go ahead and send 2 Waxing Specters and then the Waning Vengeance at the end. So we're sending 9 here. So we're sending a ton of damage to my opponent. And then we're still maintaining a pretty healthy life total here. So my opponent blocks for 3. They're actually playing a somersault on this, so they're blocking for 5 here. This just seems really good for us. Like they're not actually threatening our board back. And then they fully block out again. And then we just get to send these again next turn though. See, this is where this deck can really compound though. This hand is really good. We're able to play this, and then we're gonna transcend on top of the Passover. We'll actually banish their dagger in case that they have any retrieve effects left over in the deck. And then at this point, we're gonna go ahead and activate Enigma here, which means that we're going to send 5, and then we're going to send 2, 4, 4, and then 1. So total damage here is 13, 15, 16 damage total. And then we want to load all the higher damage up first, because then if we chip them down low enough, they have to give us entire cards for these, even though these are much smaller attacks. So now my opponent has to start giving cards on these very tiny attacks, which is definitely not the spot they want to be in. I don't think there's any 2-card hand that could potentially even clear this board here. And then a future turn is just going to involve pitching a blue and then sending 4/4 to, like, the game is just wrapped up from here. For Prism and Silver Age, we're leaning more towards a Herald-based game plan, kind of similar to like Herald aggro in CC. It's kind of awkward because both weapons don't really accomplish what you want them to do. Celestial Flurry, Luminaris is just not it. It's very expensive. The conversion doesn't really work all that well with Prism either. You do have some lines you can do, but it always kind of requires you to have like 2 blues to be able to like line up 2 things in a turn. Like this is nowhere compared to the original Luminaris, first of all, but I guess more importantly, the one that's currently played in CC. But then the other awkward part is that while we do have Iris down in the sideboard for slower matchups, there's just not really enough auras for it to function well in this format. You are missing some really key components. Cards like Shimmers or Genesis, I think that these are all like very important if you're going to be doing something like an Iris game plan. With that being said, I do think that you do have enough auras that you can pivot into these 2 different strategies. And I was actually messing around with playing Iris exclusively in every single matchup, because my thought process was like, well, into an aggro deck, if I get left with a Spectral Shield, I would rather just convert a blue, send 4 damage, and then pitch 1 card instead of Herald and pass, rather than trying to do this thing where I need 4 cards to be able to resolve 2 Heralds in a turn. And so it kind of mathed out that the Iris would just be better. The only problem is, in practice, it normally means you have to keep an extra card to pitch to Prism to make the shield, because the shield normally doesn't live to see your turn. So at the end of the day, it seemed a little bit clunky, so I'm back on Celestial Flurry into aggro decks, but I was experimenting with only being on Iris. So to go through the rest of the deck here, we have some Beckoners, but then some of the new Radiant pieces. The issue is that you need to make Spectral Shields for a couple different pinpoints during the game, but then also hitting Heralds in a 20 health format will happen, obviously, but you're not going to hit that many. So I was like originally trying like 4, every single one of these pieces. And the issue was that like, well, if the game is only like essentially 2 turns or whatever, that like, I'm just not able to like use my armor pieces. They're just sitting there empty at the end of the game. I'm trying to mix some Blade Beckoners and some of the Radiants, so that way you have that bailout of that actual unconditional 2 prevention. But then at different points in the game, you can just use the Beckoners when it's appropriate and just, block that way. But we have this whole mess of different, equipment pieces down here. And then we do have Astral Etchings if you want to lean more into Iris. I think that would be a really important card for that. And then we have Wave of Reality, just another defensive card that leaves you with the Spectral Shield. And then the rest of the deck here is mainly just Heralds. It's just Heralds. You have all of your different red cost Heralds. The only Heralds I'm playing yellows of is going to be Triumph, just because if you can dodge poppers, I think that's kind of important, especially in this format with 20 health. If you're committing a whole 7 attack and your opponent gets to block 7 with 1 card, I imagine you probably lose most of the time if you're playing into like a kind of proactive deck. Even Guardian could just, pop your Herald and then like send 10 or whatever. The rest of these cards here are mainly just blues, although we do have some of the blue auras. These will pair pretty well if you're just like going first and you drop one of these down, but it also works really well with the Iris game plan. Especially cards like Passing Mirage are really important, and some decks need to clear it instantly. Prism's ability to make a Spectral Shield is like less important in this deck. The shield just doesn't really do much. You can kind of convert a card though, and sometimes having that prevention on the board is important. It's much more important when you bring in the Iris though. The Iris, then it actually becomes like kind of a win con. So in aggro decks, you're not activating Prism as much. And then the sideboard here is some anti-aggro stuff like Essence of Ancestry Body, but then you have your cards for your slower matchups, so cards like Prismatic, Ode to Wrath, Parable. These are all going to come in with your Iris, and you kind of play like a more attrition or a base game plan. We have a lot of different equipment here to run. We have Dreamweavers into decks that run Poppers, but also there's Spell Void 1 in addition to the Halo being Spell Void 2, so you can play this into Wizards. Same goes for Stilettos being just AB1. Springboard Somersault, you could play into slow matchups where you want to protect your board, but I think more often than not, you're going to want to play in aggro. So overall, that's the initial draft of the deck, and we'll go ahead and jump into a game. We're going second into Syndra here. This is where something like the new Luminaris could be pretty good, because with our curve here, we're able to kind of resolve everything. So I definitely understand the perspective of having the Luminaris, and I do think that we could consider finding a room for it in the sideboard. At the same time, though, I can just let the Wave of Reality die this turn, and then in our opener, we can just send 4 into the Ravages. So if they are going to send a Kunai here, I do think we're going to start by blocking with the Passing Mirage. And then this one, I think, is the one I'm going to let break the Wave of Reality. And my opponent's going to play Mounting Anger. I'm going to go ahead and block this out for 4. Looks like they're just going to tap out. We're going to have to stop the Mounting Anger, but it is definitely awkward because we lose the Spectral Shield. So our Iris at this point does kind of nothing, although my opponent's off of an Arsenal. I send the Herald of Triumph. I think we're going to pitch out the Pierce Reality, and then we're just going to put probably the Essence of Ancestry Body in Arsenal. It's a good card to have. We're going to block for 4 here, so I guess my opponent's probably just going to fully commit to a pretty aggressive push here. If that is the case, we might as well just use Prism aggressively, get a shield. Syndra's going to play Wrath of Retribution. We're just going to go ahead and block. I don't think it's possible, but if there were a way to hold everything here and keep up the shield, if we could go pitch the Wrath, send this for 4, and then play the Essence of Ancestry Body, it'd be pretty sweet, but definitely not expecting to do that this turn. So they crack the fealty for the Crouching Tigers, so they're at Draconic Link 3 now, so the Dagger's going to come back and come in for 2 and 2. I don't know what their ender is. It could be like a 1 for 5. That would be pretty good. If it's the one that breaks the Arsenal, that's also pretty insane. Breaking point would be a pretty big blowout. Okay, that's a lot more manageable for us. So that was a big push turn. And we're going to take... I believe we're going to take 4 plus the 3 here. We're going to take 7. We go to 13. We would have liked to have one more blocking card, but we do get to play the Essence of Ancestry Body, though. We're just going to say no blocks on the 2 and the 2. We play the Essence, and then we'll pass turn. So it looks like they're going to pitch for Syndra here, just to buy back the daggers. If they don't have another blue, then the Essence is going to get a ton of value here. And then they're just going to play Heart of Dragon Fire. If that's the case here, we're just going to block for 6. We're going to hold up the Aura, although that's right, it does break it because of the fealty. If that is the case, though, then I guess we just say no blocks on this. This is where things get a little bit awkward, not being on the Luminaris and being on the Iris. We'll go ahead and send the Herald of Protection, and then we're just going to play Wrath on it, and then we'll Arsenal the other Heralds. We do have the choice of if we want to use Prism for a second Spectral Shield or if we want to use the equipment. I think we're probably just going to use the equipment here. Our goal here is to block with 2 cards, play the Herald of Protection, and then filter the Somersault into Arsenal. Although I'm going to hold back blocking 3 for a little bit. There's 3 more cards. If one of these is a Chain Ender like Snatch, we need to break one of the equipment pieces and then block for 3 here. Fire Tenant comes in for 3. The next thing will probably be for 4. Brand comes in. I think at this point, we're probably just going to take the block. If they play Snatch, I guess we'll just readjust and then use one of the equipment pieces and just play the Somersault. It's actually only cut through, so I'm just going to say no blocks here. We'll play Protection and then Arsenal the Springboard. My opponent says no blocks on the Herald. So now we have 2 of our equipment ready to go. And then this is a turn where if we can hold on to 3 cards here, it'll just be lights out for our opponent. I'm going to say no blocks on the Kunai. It'll get eaten by the Spectral Shield. I'll say no blocks on this Kunai as well. There's a chance they could play cut through and we get blown out, but that's just the risk I have to take at this stage in the game. Loyalty comes in for 3. We are just going to block with Protection. I'm going to keep the Triumph just because if this connects, the game should be over anyway, and I don't want to take the risk that my opponent may have a Popper. Blade Dance comes in. This is where we're going to play our Somersault. And then if they have a Chain Ender like Snatch, we have 2 Soul, so we can just use 2 of our Radiant pieces here. They end up not having a Chain Ender. They're just going to use Obliterate, buy back the daggers. They're going to send 1. We're going to say no blocks here, and this should be the game. We'll send our 7, hold up our Wrath, and my opponent decides to scoop there. They actually only have 8 blocks, so when we play the Wrath, it actually is deterministic lethal. So that was our Prism game. And then finally, we have Dromai here. I think I've covered Dromai, like 3 different times on the channel, but I'm just re-including this here just for the sake of having all the Illusionists together. Dromai is definitely a lot more aggressive slanted than the other 2 Illusionists. Even though Prism goes very tall and you normally do want to send Heralds, Dromai goes very wide and can build out an incredible board state towards the end of the game. Very simple ability. Whenever you pitch, you make an Ash, and if you put a red card, all of your dragons get go again. Your dragons are able to attack because of Storm and Standakai, where they just gain the ability to attack. For those of you unfamiliar with how the invokes work, is that all of these dragon invokes require you to transform an Ash. The Ash is just like a token that goes on the table whenever you pitch a red card to Dromai. So you need to balance good Ash generation and then having really good push turns. So the reason why this deck can go very wide is because you can play all these dragons and they all attack for 0. So let's say you play your dragons, you attack, you pass, and then on the next turn, you can play your 4-card hands, but then all the dragons you have left over from previous turns, they just get to attack with go again for 0. So it's very, very good at scaling that kind of board state. So like a turn 5 Dromai board state will be so much more powerful than a turn 1 Dromai board state. For early Ash generation, we have the Seekers, Arms, and Legs. This just works that regardless if you're going first or second, you can just pitch a card to it and make an Ash. The opt is niche, like you will be redrawing a card on turn 1, so you might as well, I guess, kind of opt and sculpt a little bit that way. Same goes for Glory Seeker, although pitching 3 cards during your opponent's turn, unless if they just like play something that doesn't have go again and pass to you, if they just hold priority and pass turn, if you like dump 3 cards to play Glory Seeker and activate it, they can just start attacking you. So I really wouldn't recommend like using Glory Seeker most of the time on if you're going second, right? You could probably get away just pitching 1 card to Seekers. If your opponent sits there with 4 cards going first and they go past priority, you could probably get away just like pitching 1 to the Seekers and then seeing what they do. Glory, I would not recommend activating unless if you're going first. But the point here is that like if you go first and you pitch 3 cards, activate Glory Seeker, pitch a card to a Seekers, arsenal a card, you now have 4 Ash. And you can even make dragons on turn 1. Like you could pitch 3 to the Glory Seeker, play like a dragon and pass. The thing is that once you like activate this, 9 times out of 10, you're kind of locked on enough Ash for the rest of the game, just because the games are so short. So these are just easy ways to have enough Ash for the rest of the game. And then we're playing deep blue because we are playing the 3-drop dragons, but we're not playing enough blues to do it. I think the 3-drop dragons are really insane, especially in a 20 health format. Cards like Vincerikai are literally half of your opponent's life total. So I think it's important that you can just play the deep blue, and then whenever you draw a 3-cost dragon, you can just sink a red in your hand. Some really cool stuff with this deck is that because of the Dromai hero text, in the end game, you can block with 3 cards. Let's say you have like 10 dragons on the table. You can block with 3 cards, play something like Rabble, and because it's a red with go again, at that point you unlock the Dromai hero text. You can now attack with all of your dragons with go again. They all cost 0. So the point of this is that you want a lot of red line aggro based cards, but you also want cards that in the late game you can block with other things, play 1 red card with go again, and then just swing out your board. So we have a lot of aggro. This is very red line focused. So we have Rabble, we have Scar for a Scar, Snatch, we have Blaze Headlong, and then we have some kind of like Ash management cards. So you have cards like Sweeping Blow. This makes an Ash. If you pitch a red to play it, then you end up making 2 Ash in the process. You have Billowing Mirage as a way to cash in your Ash. You have cards like Dust Up, just a 0 for 4 Chain Ender that can make an Ash. And then it can also turn into an Ashwing. These Ashwings are really good just because not only are they just free 0 for 1 attacks with go again that chip your opponent down really quickly, but they also have AB. Doombreaker Senpai is kind of similar to something like Spears of Surreality. It's just a 1 for 5 go again, and if they pop it, you get an Ash back though, which is actually pretty good. And then the rest of the deck is mainly just dragons. We have Passing Mirage. This is important for quite a few matchups because the dragons themselves have Phantasm, but we have Azulai, which just attacks for 2 and then can split arcane damage. This is good, especially into ally-based decks, like you're playing against Gravy or the Dromai Mirror, because your Azulai can target their allies. Chromai is crazy. It's just whenever it attacks or if it gets, or when it leaves. So like if your opponent blows it up, you get an action point. So this one is just really good. It's a head jab, but then it lets you play things like Snatch with Go Again, essentially. I think this card's really fantastic. Kyloria is really good just on hit. You get control of an item, and if they don't have an item, which 9 out of 10 times they will not, you're just going to draw a card. So this is just a dragon with Snatch. It's an on hit. We have Mirror Guy. Your first dragon attack loses Phantasm. Very important stuff into popper decks. And then we have some of our more expensive dragons. So we have Necria. This is just a 4 for 7. It's incredibly hard for your opponent to kill, and it helps you generate Ash. Vincera Guy is the big haymaker against aggro decks. It's whenever it hits a hero, it deals an additional 3. And it's specifically arcane, so it's even like kind of like pseudo unpreventable into some of the aggro decks. So you're looking at a 3-cost dragon that swings 9 health, which is crazy because if your opponent doesn't spend a card to kill this, you attack with this again on the next turn and the next turn. It lives forever. Yendurai is just more tanky as a 3/3, but it has like a shield prevention counter. The first time it were to take up to 3 damage, it prevents it. Our sideboard is teched for a couple different decks. We have anti-aggro stuff on the horizon, Essence of Ancestry. We have anti-slow decks with cards like Uvia where you can kind of grind it out, but this is also good into Wizard, which, you know, if you're playing against other Wizards, you could also bring in Themai and Sand Cover as well. You can also bring Sand Cover in against aggro. So you just have ways to prevent damage basically in the sideboard, and just depending on what kind of damage you're trying to prevent and how wide they're going. Themai is like really like the only specific targeted hate piece. It just completely shuts down Icelander and Kano. So if you have this out, I don't really know how they win the game. And so with that all being said, we'll go ahead and jump into our example game. So with this opener, I think what we're going to do here is we're going to pitch the Mirror Guy to stop the Mistblade hit, but then also create an Ash in the process. We see Rabble on top of the deck, so our turn is probably just going to be playing 2 copies of Rabble, and then either chain ending with the Passing Mirage or the Snatch. The Spider's Bite, I suppose you probably could take, although once again, we could just activate Seeker's Legs and stop the on-hit. I guess that makes more sense here. We'll see the Rabble again, but this way we open up our turn with 2 Ash. Go to our turns, it's just going to be Rabble, Rabble, Azulai. I guess we could crack the Glory Seeker and trade out the Passing Mirage for the Scar. But I think just dropping the Passing Mirage might just be helpful. I don't know if my opponent's on poppers, but I guess on the weird off chance that they are, I might as well just clear out of the deck. And then if they pop the Azulai, if they do happen to have a popper in hand, then we'll just activate the Glory Seeker and get the card draw. We're going to say no blocks. I mean, this is kind of tough. The Glory Seeker could be used for a future turn, I guess, or I could just convert this for 4 damage now. On the weird off chance that they happen to have a popper in the deck, I guess I'll just be glad that I played the Passing Mirage here, although I really wish I had that Snatch in the first hand. That would have been a much better chain ender, especially with them using all their armor so quickly. We're going to say no blocks in this dagger. It's kind of no point in ever blocking these, and I don't really think we're going to block with this hand anyway. My hope is we actually take enough damage to be able to play the Scar for a Scar with Natural Go again. They're going to play the Double Trouble. I think it's pretty obvious they're going to activate their equipments on this. I'm just going to say no blocks here. So it looks like it's going to come in for 10. That is a lot. We do drop to 9. I think what we're going to do here is, well, we're going to start with Scar for a Scar, and then I may opt to actually crack the Glory Seeker and just trade this blue for a different card here. We'll see how much damage we leak through first. The Sweeping Blow is not bad though. Like resolving it is kind of okay. I'm just kind of maybe digging for something a little bit more aggressive at the moment. We find Chromai. That's much better. So we'll go ahead and we'll play our Chromai, and then we'll go ahead and send the Chromai first. This guarantees the action point and protects it from getting popped. And then we'll go ahead and send the Azulai. Unfortunately, we get stranded with the Sweeping Blow that we can't do anything with. This hand is very good though. So if my opponent cannot present 9, we should have the game here, because our turn is going to be using the Dust Up to play Yendurai and Kyloria in the same turn, although we don't have any Ash actually, so that was kind of awkward. So we kind of need to readjust here. So we're going to use the blue and we're going to go Sweeping Blow, and then I guess only 1 Invoke. So if that's the case, I guess actually we will end up using one of these cards to block, which will be okay because they'll block for 3 through the Spider's Bite. My opponent's prioritizing this, but it doesn't actually really help them out here. So we need to at least block with one of these cards. I'm trying to think. They could go +3 over if they have Razor's Edge. This will be +3, so we'll go to 6, 7, 8, 9 with the Rousing Wave. So we'll go ahead and just block with only this and then nothing else, and this should be good enough. Yep, so it does come in for 9, we live at 2, so I guess we did the math right there. And then we should be good enough to wrap this one up, so we'll go ahead and we'll send our Sweeping Blow. And then the Kyloria is specifically what I think will do this game, and my opponent has to give 2 whole cards to stop the card draw on hit, so it looks kind of over from their perspective at least. And even more importantly, the Kyloria doesn't have Phantasm because of the Passing Mirage. I haven't seen any poppers from my opponent's deck, but if that were to happen, something like that would bail us out here. We draw a Chromai, which would normally be pretty crazy. The problem is we actually did end up running out of Ash this game. So the Chromai has to hang out in Arsenal for a little bit. I think my opponent's probably just gonna scoop here. Okay, they have Chi anyway, they couldn't have survived, but we would have gotten 4 and then 3 and 3, one of this being Arcane. My opponent has no AB, I don't think, so at some point they eventually do just die to the Asvali. And then our next turn, we would have got to bottom off the deep blue to potentially play the Vincere guy. We would have pitched to play the Dunebreaker. The Phantasm is protected, and then we could just bottom, like let's say the Necria to the deep blue and play the Vincere guy. And that would have been probably enough to steal the game from there.